I last presented to this committee on the 15th of August 2015 in relation to version 1 of the ACDC model, which was at that time first used to test the impact of changes to the residential rules. I want to recover some of that background and some of the context for that work, and basically run you through a presentation that I gave to the IHP last week in relation to the evidence of where the modelling has got to at this stage. I'd just also like to say that it's possible that I might lose my voice, so Regan might take over at some point if that does indeed happen. Yes, great. So basically the capacity for growth study and the Auckland Council Development Capacity Model are a part of an ongoing research program to better understand how Auckland, particularly its urban area, might grow and change, particularly in respect to changes to regulation. The importance of understanding that is pretty obvious, but the current focus is really on the Auckland Unitary Plan, which is going to set the direction for the first period of the Auckland Plan. The first stage, the capacity for growth study, is the first model that we had fully developed, and that really is about understanding or being able to measure what the planning system allows to happen. The next phase of that was always going to be understanding how much of that was likely to be realised, and that has evolved through the IHP and involvement of other experts in that process to the ACDC model, which really measures how likely those plan-enabled opportunities are to be able to be realised in today's market. There's a further phase which is introducing time into the analysis, which is looking forwards about thinking how time might change those conditions under which we've forecast or that we've measured feasible development, and how that might change over time, including in relation to the supply from previous periods. So that's been done primarily in the evidence of Dr. Fairgray and other submitters to the panel on this topic. The fourth phase is once everything settles down, eventually this will feed into a range of various models that we have in-house and largely replace the use of plan-enabled capacity to better understand or better direct investment into where change is actually most likely to occur instead of everywhere where it's allowed to occur. The conceptual basis for the ACDC model is that while not everything is enabled is necessarily feasible, most of what actually happens is enabled, which really drives everything that we do in relation to this modelling. The plan works in a way that essentially sets the upper limit of what can occur, but helpfully also enables us to figure out a limit to our modelling as well. And primarily there is a lot of stuff that happens that's outside of the circles that we've identified, and that has to be accounted for as well. That's not in our model, but is accounted for through other processes, such as Dr. Fairgray's evidence. That's just to indicate that that will change over time. So this is a slide that I gave in August last year. The additions in red just highlight the changes that have been made to the model, or the major changes anyway, since I last presented to you. The key one is really that we're now modelling 9 different developments, large, medium and small sized terraces, houses and apartment buildings on every single site, which increases the chances that at least one of those will end up being feasible. Certainly increase the chances from the single development that we were testing previously. The next step is to combine it with a bunch of calibrated information that we have from observed data about site development, producing the costs, including development contributions, how much it might cost per square metre to build, what the prevailing interest rate is for development finance and that kind of thing, and sell it for a price that we've set based on observed data as well. If the price is sufficiently higher than the costs, then we believe the development to be feasible, and the threshold for that is a 20% gross return. After paying tax and GST and things like that, the net return is considerably less than 20%. Step 4 is a new one. Given that we're testing 9 developments, we can only choose one. The option to develop can only be taken once, and we've used a range of different scenarios, I guess, to choose from those viable developments. The one that we choose to report mostly is maximum return, which would be the developer's first choice to implement if they had the choice, of course. There's obviously some key assumptions and limitations to the modelling. I just wanted to run over a few of the main ones. The analysis excludes a whole bunch of locations, in particular rural zones, urban greenfields, the fuzz, non-residential business zones, and that's primarily the industrial areas, and certain existing land uses. It's also worth noting that we actually exclude Housing New Zealand's land holdings from our model, but we add them back in later on as one of the sort of, I guess, accounting processes that we do after we run the model. Interestingly, SHAs are actually in the model, and that the parcels are assessed as if they're like anything else, and that's what I mean by they're not special. The outcomes indicated by the SHA gazetting process is not currently matched by the outcomes in those locations at this stage, but we can resolve that should that actually pan out. The other key thing to note is that the data is really based on today's prices. There is agreement in the group that costs and prices will change over time, and indeed they have, and that's an issue that's I'll cover slightly later on. But really the key area of disagreement that remains is exactly how they might change over time into the future, you know, that is, I guess, an area where Dr. Fairgray's evidence in particular has attracted some criticism or question marks. So the site costs, and that what the model purchases a site for, is from our June 2014 valuations. The reason for that is that means that every single site in the region has a value that we can utilise, and they're all done at the same time using the same process. And the sale prices are effectively 18 months later, which is nicely coincidental with the period that we've told the model will take to develop a site. It pays rates and interest for an 18-month period, and sells them for prices that we've calibrated to observe sales data for the various types of dwellings that we're selling, plus or minus some expert advice. And as I said before, 20% gross return is our chosen threshold for things to be feasible. So just to reiterate really that the ACDC model is a result of the 013 expert group, of which I'm a member, and it is in response to the IHP's directions. So while I'm certainly interested to be involved, the results and the findings are not mine alone. So I am speaking on behalf of a number of other people who have quite different views to this council about what should happen in Auckland, I guess. So what the panel really sought was a revised method to estimate supply, and importantly one that is capable of accommodating changes to rules and spatial patterns, so that we can use it or that the panel can be informed about the effects of various changes that they, submitters and this council, might wish to make to those things. That should produce an estimate of demand for residential, and they also wanted us to land on an estimate of demand for residential capacity as expressed in dwelling numbers, and that's not too different from what we've always said. The projections are going up and down, but in the scheme of things, they're pretty consistent at around that 400,000 dwelling need over the next 30 years or so. They also required that presentation of supply in the form of heat maps, and I'll show you those later, but we haven't been able to do that into the future. If possible, they wanted those estimates of supply and demand to be turned into forecasts about how what has been supplied might meet the needs that were identified over the coming years. And that's largely contained in the evidence of Dr. Fairgrave for the council. And obviously the panel advised that it seeks to use the work to essentially assess whether the plan was going to deliver on its targets, which are set out in the RPS and in the Auckland plan. So just to build up on the simple model that we had before, effectively the ACDC model is a probabilistic filter. It basically says we've identified these sites that we think are going to be more likely to develop under the conditions that we've tested. That doesn't mean that they will develop, or that sites that aren't identified as being feasible won't develop. But what it does indicate is that if that site was for sale in 2014 and the plan rules were in place, those are the ones that the developers would probably have a second look at. Of course, given that we're generating quite a big number out of this model, there's only a small proportion of them that can happen in any 1 year, and that would be probably the lowest hanging fruit out of that, or perhaps sites that developers already own. So that really brings us back to time, which is important when we're going forward, but I don't want to run through all of that, but basically time from this point onwards is dealt with as an external forecast.